The auction stage in Rico, Colorado stood empty except for one small figure, and Katherine Bellamy could hear the whispers spreading through the crowd like wildfire on dry grass as the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly in the summer of 1882. "Nobody wants that one," a woman muttered nearby, loud enough for Katherine to hear every word. "Been through 3 families already. Trouble, that is what she is." Katherine stood on the wooden platform, her hands clasped tightly in front of her worn cotton dress, trying to make herself as small as possible. At 18 years old, she had been told she was too old for most families looking to adopt, too thin from years of meager meals at the orphanage in Denver, and too plain with her mousy brown hair and ordinary features. The orphan train had brought her here along with 6 other children, all younger, all already claimed by families who wanted fresh workers for their farms or shops. She was the last one standing here, unwanted and alone, just like she had been her entire life. The auctioneer, a portly man named Mr. Henderson, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Now, folks, this young lady here is 18 years old, strong as an ox despite her size, and she can read and write. Perfect for someone needing help around the house or shop. Starting bid at $5 for her indenture papers." Silence answered him. Katherine felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had cried enough in her life, spent enough nights sobbing into thin orphanage pillows. She would not cry here, not in front of all these people who looked at her like she was merchandise that nobody wanted to purchase. $4. Mr. Henderson tried again, his voice growing more desperate. 3. Katherine's vision blurred despite her best efforts. A single tear rolled down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it away with the back of her hand. "No one wants me," she whispered, so quietly that only Mr. Henderson could hear. But then her voice broke, louder this time, raw with all the pain of 18 years of rejection. "No one wants me." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some people looked away. Others shook their heads and began to disperse. Katherine felt her knees weakening, felt the terrible weight of knowing she would be sent back to Denver, back to the orphanage where she would age out with no prospects, no future, nothing but a life of drudgery and loneliness stretching before her. That was when she heard the footsteps. They were heavy, purposeful, the sound of boots striking the dirt road with confidence. The crowd parted like water before a ship, and Katherine lifted her tear-stained face to see who was approaching. The man who walked toward the stage was unlike anyone she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun. His arms, visible beneath rolled-up shirt sleeves, were corded with muscle, the kind that came from years of hard physical labor rather than idle showmanship. His chest strained against his simple cotton shirt, and his hands looked like they could snap a branch in half without effort. But it was his face that caught her attention most. He had strong, angular features weathered by sun and wind, a solid jaw covered in a few days' worth of dark stubble, and eyes the color of storm clouds that seemed to see straight through to her soul. His dark brown hair fell past his collar, thick and slightly wild, as though he could not be bothered with regular trips to a barber. He walked with the easy grace of a man who knew his own strength and had no need to prove it. There was something almost predatory about the way he moved, yet Katherine felt no fear. Instead, she felt something stir inside her that she could not quite name, something that made her heart beat faster and her breath catch in her throat. The man stopped at the base of the stage and looked up at her. For a long moment, their eyes met, and Katherine felt as though the entire town of Rico had disappeared, leaving only the two of them in the mountain air. "How much?" His voice was deep, rough around the edges, the voice of someone who spent more time talking to mountains than people. Mr. Henderson jumped as though he had been shocked. "Mr. Lancaster, I did not expect to see you in town. You are interested in taking on an indentured worker. How much?" The man repeated, never taking his eyes off Katherine. "Well, I was asking $3 for her papers." The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather pouch. He counted out coins onto the stage, and Katherine heard several people in the remaining crowd gasp. $50. For her freedom, not her papers. She will come with me of her own choice as a free woman or not at all. Katherine's legs nearly gave out beneath her. $50 was more money than she had ever seen in her life. It was enough to buy a horse, supplies for months, even a small piece of land. And he was offering it not to own her but to free her. Mr. Henderson's eyes bulged. $50. Sir, that is far more than necessary, I assure you. Take it or leave it. The man finally looked away from Katherine to fix Mr. Henderson with a stare that could have frozen the San Juan River solid. "And I want it in writing that she is a free woman, with no debts, no obligations, nothing that binds her to anyone." Of course. Mr. Henderson scrambled to pull out papers from his leather case, his hands shaking as he wrote. "May I ask what your interest is in this young lady?" "No." The single word shut down any further questions. Katherine found her voice, though it came out shakier than she would have liked. "Why?" The man looked back up at her, and something in his expression softened just slightly. "Because I know what it is like to be unwanted. Because I have more money than I need and a cabin big enough for two. Because you deserve better than this." He gestured at the stage, at the dispersing crowd, at the whole sorry situation. "Because when I looked at you, I saw someone worth saving." More tears came then, but these were different. These were tears of relief, of gratitude, of something that felt dangerously close to hope. "I do not even know your name," Katherine said. "Dalton Lancaster. I have a ranch up in the mountains about 10 miles north of here. I raise horses, trap during the winter, and mostly keep to myself. It is isolated, hard living, and the winters are brutal. But you will have your own room, your own space, and you will be free to leave whenever you choose. I am offering you a job as my housekeeper, nothing more. Fair wages, fair treatment, and respect. What do you say?" Katherine looked down at this mountain man, who had appeared out of nowhere like an answer to a prayer she had been too afraid to speak aloud. She thought about going back to Denver, back to the orphanage, back to a life that held nothing for her. Then she thought about the possibility of a new beginning, of freedom, of a chance to prove that she was worth more than the nothing everyone else saw when they looked at her. "I say yes," she whispered. Then louder, stronger. "I say yes." Dalton's face broke into the smallest of smiles, just a slight curve at the corner of his mouth, but it transformed his entire face. He looked younger, less dangerous, almost gentle. "Then come down from there, Katherine Bellamy. You do not belong on that stage." He held out his hand to help her down, and Katherine took it. His palm was calloused and rough, but his grip was careful, as though he was afraid of breaking her. When her feet touched solid ground, she felt something shift inside her. For the first time in her 18 years of life, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Mr. Henderson thrust the papers at Dalton, who took them with his free hand, still holding Katherine's with the other. "All legal and proper, Mr. Lancaster. The girl is free, no debts, no obligations." Dalton handed the papers to Katherine. "These are yours. Keep them safe." Katherine clutched the papers to her chest like they were made of gold. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I do not know how to thank you. No need for thanks. You will earn your keep up at the ranch, I promise you that. I am not doing you a favor. I am hiring help that I need. The cabin is a mess, My cooking could kill a bear, and I have been wearing the same 3 shirts for the past month because I cannot remember the last time I did proper washing. You will work hard, but you will be treated fair. That is the deal." Katherine nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Dalton released her hand and turned toward the edge of town where a massive black horse stood tied to a post. The animal was huge, easily 17 hands high, with a wild look in its eyes that matched its owner. "Have you ever ridden?" Dalton asked. "No, sir, I have never had the opportunity." "You can stop calling me sir. Dalton will do fine. And I guess that means you are riding with me." He untied the horse and swung up into the saddle with an ease that spoke of years of practice. Then he held down his hand to Katherine. "Put your foot on mine and I will pull you up." Katherine hesitated for only a moment before doing as he instructed. His strength was remarkable. He pulled her up behind him as though she weighed nothing at all, settling her on the horse's back behind the saddle. "Hold on tight. Thunder here likes to run, and the path up to the ranch is steep." Katherine wrapped her arms around Dalton's waist, feeling the solid wall of muscle beneath his shirt. She could feel the heat of his body, smell the scent of pine and wood smoke, and something uniquely him. Her face pressed against his broad back, and she felt safer than she had in her entire life. Dalton clicked his tongue, and Thunder took off at a canter that quickly became a gallop. Katherine held on for dear life as they left Rico behind, climbing up into the San Juan Mountains that rose like giants around them. The town grew smaller below them, and with every stride of the horse, Katherine felt her old life falling away. The path was indeed steep, winding through groves of aspen and pine, crossing streams that ran cold and clear from snowmelt higher up. The air grew thinner and cooler as they climbed, and Katherine marveled at the wild beauty around her. She had grown up in Denver, in an orphanage surrounded by dusty streets and brick buildings. She had never known that places like this existed, places where the sky seemed close enough to touch and the mountains stretched on forever. After what felt like an hour of riding, Dalton slowed Thunder to a walk. "Almost there," he said over his shoulder. "Just around this bend." They rounded a curve in the path, and Katherine gasped. Ahead of them was a valley nestled between peaks, a hidden paradise of green meadow and crystal streams. In the center stood a cabin, larger than she had expected, built from sturdy logs with a stone chimney rising from one end. Behind it stood a barn and several corrals where horses grazed peacefully. The entire property was surrounded by forest, private and secluded, a world unto itself. "This is yours?" Katherine asked in wonder. "This is mine. Been here 5 years now, built most of it myself." There was pride in his voice, the kind that came from honest work and accomplishment. They rode up to the cabin and Dalton dismounted, then helped Katherine down. Her legs were shaky from the ride, and she stumbled slightly. His hands caught her waist, steadying her, and for a moment they stood close enough that she could count the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. "You will get used to riding," he said softly. "Give it time." Then he stepped back and led Thunder toward the barn. "Come on, I will show you around after I get him settled." Katherine followed, her worn shoes quiet on the grass. The barn was clean and well organized, with several stalls and tack hanging neatly on the walls. Dalton removed Thunder's saddle and bridle with practiced efficiency, then brushed the horse down while Katherine watched. "I have 6 horses right now," he explained as he worked. "Thunder here, 3 mares and 2 yearling colts. I sell horses down in Telluride and Rico, trade for supplies and whatever I need. The money is good enough that I do not have to go down to town more than once a month or so. You said you trap in the winter, beaver, fox, whatever I can find. The pelts bring in extra money and give me something to do when I am snowed in for weeks at a time." He finished with thunder and led Katherine back out into the sunlight. Winter up here is no joke. We will be completely cut off from November through March, sometimes April if the snow is bad. You need to know that before you agree to stay. If you want to change your mind and go back to Rico, I will take you tomorrow. No hard feelings. Katherine looked around at the valley, at the cabin, at this place that seemed like something out of a dream. Then she looked at Dalton, at his honest face and steady eyes. I am not changing my mind. I want to stay, he nodded, satisfied. Then let me show you the cabin. The inside of the cabin was indeed a mess, just as Dalton had promised. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and living space, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. Dirty dishes were piled in a basin, clothes were scattered on chairs, and dust covered nearly every surface. But beneath the mess, Katherine could see solid craftsmanship. The furniture was well made, the windows were large and let in plenty of light, and the floor was smooth planking rather than packed dirt. Your room is through here, Dalton said, opening a door off the main room. Inside was a small bedroom with a real bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the meadow. It was sparse but clean, the only room in the cabin that seemed to have been kept neat. I cleaned it out yesterday after I decided to go into town. Figured if I was going to hire help, I should at least give them a decent room. You decided yesterday, but how did you know you would find someone? Dalton shrugged. I did not, but I heard the orphan train was coming through, and I thought maybe there would be someone who needed a fresh start. Someone who would not mind the isolation, who could use a safe place to figure out their next move. I have the space and the money. Seemed like the right thing to do. Katherine set her freedom papers on the dresser, smoothing them out carefully. She had no other possessions, nothing but the dress she wore and the shoes on her feet. Everything she owned in the world could fit in her 2 hands. I will get you some proper clothes, Dalton said, as though reading her mind. We can order them from the catalog, or I can take you down to Telluride next month. They have better stores there than Rico does. For now, I have some old shirts that might work, and you can wash that dress. You have done too much already, Katherine said, turning to face him. $50 for my freedom, a job, a room, and now clothes. I cannot possibly repay you. I do not want repayment. I want a clean cabin, decent meals, and maybe someone to talk to who is not a horse. You give me that, we will call it even. He left her then to get settled, though there was nothing to settle. Katherine sat on the bed, the first real bed she had been able to call her own, and let herself cry properly. She cried for all the years of loneliness, for the fear she had felt on that stage, for the overwhelming relief of being saved. And she cried because, for the first time in her life, someone had looked at her and seen worth. When her tears were spent, Katherine stood and went back out into the main room. Dalton was nowhere to be seen, probably out tending to his horses or doing whatever needed to be done on a mountain ranch. Katherine looked at the mess surrounding her and rolled up her sleeves. If Dalton had given her a chance at a new life, the least she could do was earn her keep. She started with the dishes, heating water over the fireplace and scrubbing until her hands were red and raw. Then she swept the floor, dusted every surface, organized the scattered clothes into neat piles for washing, and cleaned the windows until they sparkled. She found food stores in a pantry and began preparing dinner, making do with what she found. Salt pork, potatoes, some wrinkled apples, and flour for biscuits. The sun was setting by the time Dalton returned, and Katherine had a meal ready on the table. He stopped in the doorway and stared. The cabin had been transformed. Everything was clean and organized, and the smell of cooking food filled the air. You did not have to do all this today, he said, but his voice was warm with approval. I wanted to. You gave me a chance, Dalton. I intend to prove that you made the right choice." They sat down to eat together, and Katherine watched as Dalton took his first bite, his eyes closed in obvious pleasure. "I had forgotten what real cooking tastes like. I have been living on jerky and half-burned beans for the past month." "Then I will make sure you eat properly from now on," Katherine said, and felt a flush of pride at his praise. They ate in comfortable silence for a while before Dalton spoke again. "Tell me about yourself. Where are you from originally?" Katherine set down her fork. "I do not remember my parents. I was told my mother died when I was born, and my father brought me to the orphanage in Denver when I was just a baby. He never came back. I grew up there, worked there, and waited for a family that never wanted me. I was always too old, too plain, too something. The younger children got adopted, but not me. Never me. When the orphan train came through looking for workers, I volunteered. I thought maybe somewhere out here, away from the city, someone might need what I could offer. I did not expect it to be you." "I am glad it was me," Dalton said quietly. "I am glad I went into town today." "Tell me about you," Katherine countered. "How does a man end up alone on a mountain?" Dalton's face grew shadowed. "I grew up in Missouri, youngest of 5 boys. My father was a hard man, thought that love was weakness and kindness was for fools. He worked us like dogs and beat us when we did not meet his standards. My older brothers learned to be just like him. I could not. When I was 16, I left home with nothing but a horse and a rifle. I drifted west, worked on cattle drives, trapped in Montana, and finally ended up here. I bought this land 5 years ago with money I had saved, built this cabin with my own 2 hands, and made a life where I do not have to answer to anyone or worry about someone raising a hand to me. I keep to myself because most people only bring trouble. But sometimes, the isolation gets heavy. Sometimes, I think about what it might be like to have someone around who does not see me as a means to an end." Katherine heard the loneliness in his voice, recognized it because it matched her own. "I understand that more than you know. I have spent my whole life being invisible, being nothing to anyone. Being here, being seen by you, it means more than I can say." Their eyes met across the table, and something passed between them, some recognition of kindred spirits who had both been shaped by rejection and isolation. Neither of them spoke, but Katherine felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the meal they had just shared. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Katherine rose early each morning, long before dawn, and started the fire. She prepared breakfast for Dalton before he went out to tend the horses and check his traps in the surrounding woods. While he worked, she cleaned, cooked, and slowly made the cabin into a proper home. She mended his clothes, organized his supplies, and found small ways to make their space more comfortable. Dalton, for his part, proved to be a man of his word. He treated her with respect and kindness, never raising his voice or his hand. He taught her how to ride, starting with one of the gentler mares, and Katherine found she had a natural seat in the saddle. He showed her around the property, pointing out landmarks and teaching her how to navigate the mountain terrain. He even taught her how to shoot, insisting that any woman living alone in the wilderness needed to know how to defend herself. "What if something happens to me?" he said as he handed her the rifle. "What if I break a leg or get sick? You need to be able to protect yourself and provide for yourself. I will not leave you helpless, Katherine." So she learned to shoot and discovered she had a good eye. She learned to fish in the cold mountain streams and to identify which plants were safe to eat and which were poison. She learned the rhythms of the mountain, the calls of the birds, the signs that meant a storm was coming. But more than the practical skills, Katherine learned about Dalton himself. She learned that despite his rough exterior and isolated life, He had a gentle heart. She saw how carefully he treated his horses, how he would spend hours with a skittish colt, earning its trust rather than breaking its spirit. She heard the pleasure in his voice when he talked about the mountains, about the way the sun rose over the eastern peaks, or how the aspens turned gold in the fall. She learned that he read, which surprised her. He had a small collection of books that he had acquired through trades, and he would sit by the fire in the evenings and lose himself in stories of faraway places. She learned that he had a scar on his left shoulder from a mountain lion attack 3 years prior, and another on his ribs from where his father had broken them when he was 14. She learned that he loved music, but could not carry a tune to save his life, and that he had a weakness for anything sweet, especially if it involved apples. And as Katherine learned about Dalton, she found herself falling for him in ways that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. It started small, with the way her heart would speed up when she heard him returning to the cabin each evening. Then it grew into the way she found herself watching him work, admiring the play of muscles under his shirt, the competence and strength in every movement he made. It bloomed into something deeper when she caught him watching her as well, his gray eyes soft with something that looked like longing. 2 months passed before anything changed between them. It was late September, and Katherine was outside hanging laundry on the line Dalton had strung for her. The day was warm, one of the last beautiful days before winter swept down from the high peaks. She was humming to herself, happy in a way she had never known she could be, when she heard Dalton call her name. She turned to see him walking toward her from the barn, and something in his expression made her heart skip. He looked nervous, which was strange because Dalton never looked nervous. He was always so steady, so sure of himself. "Katherine, I need to talk to you about something," he said when he reached her. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong. Everything is right, which is the problem." He ran a hand through his hair, making it stick up in wild directions. "You have been here 2 months now, and every day I tell myself that I am your employer, that you are here to work, that I have no right to think of you any other way. But I cannot stop thinking about you, Katherine. I cannot stop noticing the way you smile when you think no one is watching, or how you sing while you cook, or the way the sun catches in your hair. I cannot stop wanting to be near you, wanting to hear your voice, wanting to make you laugh just to see your face light up." Katherine's heart was pounding so hard she was sure Dalton must be able to hear it. "Dalton, let me finish," he said, holding up a hand. "I know I am just a rough mountain man who does not know how to talk pretty or court a woman properly. I know I am older than you and probably set in my ways. But I have feelings for you, Katherine, real feelings. And if there is any chance that you might feel something for me too, I would like permission to court you properly. And if there is not, I will never bring it up again. You will still have your job, your room, your place here for as long as you want it. I will never make you uncomfortable or pressure you into anything. You have my word on that." Katherine's eyes filled with tears, but they were good tears. "You think I might not feel anything for you?" "Dalton, I have been falling in love with you since the day you walked up to that stage and saw me when everyone else looked away. I have been trying to convince myself that it was just gratitude, just relief at being saved. But it is more than that. It is the way you treat me like I matter, like my thoughts and feelings are important. It is your kindness and your strength and the way you make me feel safe and valued. It is everything about you, and I do not know how to not love you." Dalton's face transformed, the worry melting away into pure joy. "You love me." "I love you," Katherine confirmed, and saying it out loud made it feel even more real. "I love you so much it scares me." Dalton closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. His hands came up to cup her face, gentle despite their size and strength. It scares me too. I have never felt this way about anyone, but I know that if I let you go, I would regret it for the rest of my life. Then he kissed her, and Katherine felt like she was flying. His lips were warm and surprisingly soft, moving against hers with a tenderness that made her knees weak. She gripped his shoulders for support, feeling the solid muscle beneath her hands, and kissed him back with all the love and longing she had been holding inside. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. Dalton rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right, Katherine. I want to court you, marry you if you will have me, and spend the rest of my life making you happy. Will you let me do that?" "Yes," Katherine whispered. Yes to all of it. The courtship that followed was sweet and earnest. Dalton proved to be a surprisingly romantic man once he allowed himself to show it. He picked wildflowers for Katherine and left them on her pillow. He took her on rides to beautiful spots in the mountains, secret places he had discovered during his years of solitude. He held her hand while they sat by the fire in the evenings, talking about their pasts, their dreams, their hopes for the future. He told her about the ranch he wanted to build, how he planned to expand his horse breeding operation and maybe buy more land. She told him about her desire to have a real family, children who would grow up knowing they were wanted and loved. They talked about books and weather and what supplies they would need to stock up before winter hit, but they also simply enjoyed being together. Katherine had never known that love could be like this, comfortable and exciting all at once. She loved the way Dalton would sometimes just look at her, like he could not quite believe she was real. She loved how he would find excuses to touch her, a hand on the small of her back, fingers brushing hers as they passed dishes at dinner, an arm around her shoulders when they watched the sunset. And the physical attraction between them grew stronger every day. Katherine found herself thinking about Dalton in ways that made her blush, imagining what it would be like when they were married, and she could touch him without restraint. She caught him looking at her with heat in his eyes, saw the way his jaw would clench when she stretched or moved in certain ways. But Dalton was adamant about respecting her, about doing things properly. "When we marry, Katherine, I want it to be right," he told her one evening as they sat close together on the porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "I want you to come to me as my wife with no shame, no guilt, no wondering if I will respect you in the morning. You deserve that." "You are a good man, Dalton Lancaster," Katherine said, leaning her head on his broad shoulder. "You make me want to be a better man," he replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. 1 month into their courtship, Dalton took Katherine down to Telluride. It was a long ride, almost a full day, but Dalton said it was important. When they arrived, he took her straight to the general store and told her to pick out whatever she needed: clothes, fabric, thread, anything at all. "Dalton, this is too much," Katherine protested as he piled items on the counter. "Nothing is too much for my future wife," he said firmly. "Besides, winter is coming. You need warm clothes, and I want you to have things that make you happy." They spent the night at the hotel in town, in separate rooms of course, and Dalton took her to dinner at the nicest restaurant Telluride had to offer. Afterward, they walked through the town as evening fell, and Dalton stopped outside the church. "Katherine Bellamy, I cannot wait any longer to ask you this properly." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It was simple but beautiful, a gold band with a small diamond that caught the lamplight. "I bought this in Rico the day after I met you. I told myself I was being foolish, that you might not stay, that you might not feel anything for me. But I could not help myself. I saw it and knew it belonged on your finger. So I am asking you now, in front of this church and God and anyone else who might be watching, will you marry me?" Will you be my wife, my partner, my everything for the rest of our lives? Katherine's vision blurred with tears. Yes, Dalton. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he kissed her right there on the street, not caring who saw them, and Katherine kissed him back with all the joy in her heart. They were married 2 weeks later in that same church in Telluride. There were no guests except the pastor and his wife, but Katherine did not care. All that mattered was Dalton standing beside her in a new suit he had bought for the occasion, looking both handsome and slightly uncomfortable in formal clothing. All that mattered was speaking her vows and hearing his in return, his deep voice steady and sure as he promised to love and cherish her all the days of his life. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife and told Dalton he could kiss his bride, Dalton pulled Katherine into his arms and kissed her with a passion that made the pastor's wife giggle and fan herself. Katherine felt like her heart might burst from happiness. They spent their wedding night at the hotel, and Katherine finally learned what it meant to be loved by Dalton Lancaster completely. He was gentle and patient with her inexperience, taking his time to make sure she felt nothing but pleasure. And when they finally came together as husband and wife, Katherine understood why people wrote poems and songs about love. Being with Dalton, being held in his strong arms, feeling his love in every touch and kiss, was the most beautiful experience of her life. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the hotel bed, and Dalton traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Are you happy, Mrs. Lancaster?" he asked softly. Katherine pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his steadily beating heart. "I did not know happiness like this existed until I met you." They returned to the mountain ranch the next day, and Katherine began her life as Dalton's wife. The first snowfall came in early November, and by mid-November they were snowed in just as Dalton had promised. But Katherine did not mind the isolation. She had everything she needed within the walls of their cabin: warmth, food, and most importantly, the man she loved. The winter months were peaceful and intimate. Dalton taught Katherine how to make snowshoes, and they would trek through the winter wonderland surrounding their cabin. He showed her how to ice fish and how to read animal tracks in the snow. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other or just talking, sharing every thought and dream. And at night, they explored the passion between them, learning each other's bodies, discovering what gave pleasure and what created the most exquisite closeness. Katherine had never imagined that marriage could be so fulfilling, that being with someone could bring such joy not just to her heart but to her body as well. By January, Katherine began to suspect she was pregnant. Her monthly courses stopped, and she felt tired and slightly nauseous in the mornings. She waited another month to be sure before telling Dalton. She wanted to pick the perfect moment. It came on a clear February evening. They had just finished dinner, and Dalton was banking the fire for the night. Katherine took a deep breath and said, "Dalton, I have something to tell you." He turned to look at her, concern immediately flooding his face. "What is wrong? Are you ill?" "No, I am not ill. I am with child. We are going to have a baby." Dalton froze for a moment, his eyes going wide. Then a grin spread across his face, the biggest, most joyful expression Katherine had ever seen on him. He crossed the room in 3 strides and swept her up into his arms, spinning her around before remembering himself and setting her down gently. "A baby. We are having a baby." His voice was thick with emotion. "Yes, we are having a baby. Around August, I think." Dalton dropped to his knees and pressed his ear against her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. This is your papa. I am going to love you so much. I am going to give you everything I never had. You are already the most wanted baby in the world." Katherine ran her fingers through Dalton's hair, her own eyes wet with tears. "You are going to be such a good father." "I am going to try my hardest," he said, looking up at her with determination in his eyes. "This child will never wonder if they are wanted. This child will never feel unloved or unwanted. I swear that to you, Katherine." "I know," she said softly. "I know." The rest of the winter and spring passed in a blur of preparation. Dalton built a cradle, spending hours sanding and polishing the wood until it was smooth as silk. Katherine sewed tiny clothes from soft fabric Dalton had brought back from his last trip to town. They argued playfully about names and made plans for how to rearrange the cabin to accommodate their growing family. The snow finally melted in April, and by May, Katherine's belly had grown round and obvious. Dalton was obsessively protective, barely letting her lift anything heavier than a dish. He took over most of the heavy chores, insisting she rest and take care of herself and the baby. In June, Dalton made the trip down to Telluride and returned with a doctor willing to travel up to their cabin when Katherine's time came. Dr. Morrison was an older man with a kind face and steady hands. He examined Katherine and pronounced her healthy and strong. "The baby should come in early August," he confirmed. "I will plan to come up at the end of July and stay until after the birth, just to be safe. This is your first child, Mrs. Lancaster, and mountain births can be tricky. I would rather be here early than too late." Katherine was grateful for the doctor's willingness to make the journey. As much as she trusted Dalton, the thought of giving birth with only him to help her was terrifying. Dr. Morrison arrived on July 28th and made himself comfortable in what had been Katherine's room before she married Dalton. He was a pleasant house guest, entertaining them with stories of his years practicing medicine and never making them feel like he was intruding. Katherine's labor began on August 5th, just after dawn. It started with a low ache in her back that gradually grew stronger. By mid-morning, the pains were coming regularly, and Dr. Morrison took charge, moving her into the bedroom and giving Dalton instructions to boil water and gather clean linens. The labor was long and hard. Katherine had never experienced pain like this, waves of agony that seemed to go on forever. Dalton stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, whispering words of encouragement and love. "You can do this, Katherine. You are the strongest person I know. Just a little longer, my love. I am right here. I am not going anywhere." Hours blurred together until finally, as the sun was setting and painting the sky orange and gold, Katherine gave one last tremendous push and heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the sharp cry of a newborn baby. "It is a boy, Dr. Morrison announced, holding up a squirming, red-faced infant. A healthy, strong boy. Dalton's face was wet with tears as the doctor cleaned the baby and placed him in Katherine's arms. She looked down at her son, at his tiny perfect features and shock of dark hair, and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. "He is beautiful," she whispered. "He is perfect." "He looks like you," Dalton said, running one large, gentle finger down the baby's soft cheek. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months but had not made a final decision. Now, looking at her son, Katherine knew. "Daniel. His name is Daniel Thomas Lancaster." "Daniel," Dalton repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Welcome to the world, Daniel. Welcome home, son." Dr. Morrison stayed another week to make sure both Katherine and baby Daniel were healthy before heading back to Telluride. By then, Katherine was up and moving around, though still tired. Daniel proved to be a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in long stretches. Dalton was completely smitten with his son, spending hours just watching him sleep or holding him against his broad chest. "I cannot believe he is ours," Dalton said one evening as he rocked Daniel in the cradle he had built. "I cannot believe we made this perfect little person." "You are a natural father," Katherine observed from where she sat mending one of Dalton's shirts. "I just keep thinking about everything I want to teach him. How to ride, how to track, how to be a good man. I want to give him everything, Katherine. I want him to grow up knowing he is loved." "He will know. How could he not with you as his father?" The months that followed were exhausting but joyful. Daniel grew quickly, becoming more alert and responsive. He smiled his first real smile at 6 weeks old, and Dalton carried on about it for days. He laughed his first laugh at 3 months, and the sound became everyone's favorite thing. By the time Daniel was 6 months old, Katherine began to suspect she was pregnant again. This time, she felt more confident in the signs. She told Dalton on a cold December evening as they sat by the fire with Daniel sleeping in his cradle nearby. "Another baby." Dalton's eyes lit up. "When?" "Summer, I think. July or August again." Dalton pulled her into his arms carefully, conscious of Daniel sleeping nearby. "We are going to have 2 children. Katherine, I never dreamed I could have a family like this. You have given me everything I never knew I wanted." "You gave me everything first," Katherine reminded him. "You saw me when no one else did. You gave me a home, a family, a life." "I love you, Dalton Lancaster." "I love you too, Katherine Lancaster. I will love you until the day I die and beyond." The pregnancy with their second child was easier than the first. Katherine knew what to expect, and her body seemed to handle it better. Daniel kept her busy, and the months flew by. Dr. Morrison made the journey up to their cabin again in mid-July, and on August 2nd, Katherine gave birth to a daughter. "She is going to break hearts," Dalton said, holding his tiny daughter with infinite tenderness. "She looks exactly like you, Katherine. Beautiful." They named her Emma Rose Lancaster, and she proved to be just as good a baby as her brother had been. Daniel, now 13 months old, was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to touch her gently and bring her his toys. Life settled into a new rhythm. Katherine managed the household and the children while Dalton ran the ranch, which had grown considerably. He had bought more land and expanded his horse operation. They were comfortable financially, never struggling the way so many frontier families did. Dalton's skill with horses and his reputation for honest dealing meant he always had buyers for his stock. The years passed in a blur of happiness. Daniel grew into a strong, curious boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's warm smile. He followed Dalton everywhere, learning to ride before he could barely walk, absorbing everything his father taught him about horses and the mountain life. Emma grew into a bright, spirited girl with her mother's intelligence and her father's determination. She was not content to stay inside doing traditional women's work, instead insisting on following her father and brother out to the barn and the corrals. When Daniel was 4 and Emma was 3, Katherine gave birth to twin boys, James and Joseph. Dalton was beside himself with joy at having 2 more sons. The cabin, which had seemed so spacious when Katherine first arrived, now felt crowded but happy, bursting with life and love. "We might need to add on some rooms," Dalton said one evening as he surveyed their growing family. "Or build a bigger house altogether," Katherine suggested. "Something with enough room for everyone." So Dalton began planning a new house, drawing sketches and discussing ideas with Katherine. Over the next 2 years, he built a large, beautiful home on the same property as their original cabin. It had 6 bedrooms, a large kitchen, a parlor, and even a study where Dalton could keep his accounts and Katherine could store her growing collection of books. They moved into the new house when the twins were 2 years old, and Katherine stood in the spacious kitchen and marveled at how far she had come. 9 years ago, she had stood on a stage in Rico, unwanted and unloved, convinced her life would amount to nothing. Now she stood in a beautiful home with a husband who adored her and 4 healthy children, who filled her days with laughter and purpose. That evening, after the children were all tucked into their beds, Dalton found Katherine standing on the porch of their new house, looking out at the mountains silhouetted against the sunset. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on her head. "I am thinking about how lucky I am, how different my life could have been if you had not walked up to that stage. I am the lucky one, Katherine. You brought life and love to this mountain. Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. You gave me a reason to live, a reason to be better. You gave me a family. You gave me everything." Katherine turned in his arms and looked up at her husband. He was older now, with lines around his eyes and a few threads of silver in his dark hair, but he was still the same man who had seen her when no one else did. Still strong and protective, still gentle and kind, still hers. "I love you, Dalton Lancaster. I will love you forever." "And I will love you forever, Katherine Lancaster." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 9 years of love and partnership and passion. When they pulled apart, Katherine smiled. "You ever miss the solitude, the quiet life you had before I came along?" Dalton laughed, a deep rumbling sound. Not for a single moment. The quiet was just loneliness by another name. This noise and chaos and constant activity, this is living. This is what I was always meant for. I just did not know it until you. They stood together on the porch as the stars began to appear, comfortable in the silence that comes from years of knowing someone completely. Inside the house, they could hear the occasional sound of one of the children stirring or calling out, and Dalton would go check on them. Katherine thought about how full her life had become, how rich in all the ways that mattered. Over the next 10 years, Katherine and Dalton continued to build their life together. The children grew, each one developing their own personality and interests. Daniel became his father's right-hand man on the ranch, a natural horseman with a gift for gentling even the wildest horses. Emma surprised everyone by being the best shot in the family, able to outshoot her brothers and even give her father competition. The twins, James and Joseph, were inseparable, always together, always getting into good-natured mischief. Katherine became known throughout the area as the woman who would help anyone in need. She remembered what it was like to be unwanted and made it her mission to ensure no one in their community felt that way. She took in orphans traveling through on trains, fed hungry drifters, and helped families who had fallen on hard times. Their dinner table often had extra places set for people who needed a meal and a kind word. "You have a gift for seeing people," Dalton told her one evening after she had sent a young mother and her children on their way with food and supplies. "You see them the way I saw you that day in Rico." "I see them the way you taught me to see people," Katherine corrected. "You showed me that one person caring can change everything." Dalton pulled her close. "We make a good team, Mrs. Lancaster. The best team," Katherine agreed. When Daniel turned 18, he brought home a girl he had met in Telluride, a sweet young woman named Sarah who worked in her family's store. Katherine recognized the look in her son's eyes. It was the same look Dalton had when he looked at her. Young love, but real love nonetheless. "She is the one, Mama," Daniel confided in Katherine one afternoon. "I know I am young, but I know she is the one." "Then bring her around more often. Let us get to know her. If she is going to be part of this family, we want to make sure she knows what she is getting into." Sarah became a frequent visitor to the ranch, and Katherine grew to love her like the daughter-in-law she would become. She was kind, hardworking, and clearly adored Daniel. When Daniel asked Dalton's permission to marry her, Dalton gave his blessing with tears in his eyes. "It is strange," Dalton said to Katherine that night. "He is the same age I was when I left home, but his life is so different from mine. He is loved and supported. He does not have to run away to find happiness. He can build it right here." "That is because of you, Dalton. You broke the cycle. You created something beautiful out of your pain." Daniel and Sarah were married in the spring, in the same church in Telluride where Dalton and Katherine had married 20 years earlier. The whole family made the journey down, and Katherine cried happy tears as she watched her son pledge his love to his bride. 2 years later, Daniel and Sarah presented them with their first grandchild, a baby boy they named Dalton, after his grandfather. Holding his grandson for the first time, Dalton wept openly. "I never thought I would see this day," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I never thought I would have family, let alone grandchildren. Katherine, look at what we built. Look at what came from that day in Rico." Katherine leaned against her husband's side, watching Daniel and Sarah cooing over their baby, seeing her other children gathered around eager to meet their nephew. "We built love, Dalton. That is what we built, and it is going to keep growing for generations." Over the next several years, the family continued to expand. Emma fell in love with a young doctor who came to practice in Telluride, and they married when she was 22. The twins both found brides, and the ranch property began to fill with small houses as each of the married children built homes nearby. They worked together to expand the horse operation into one of the most successful in Colorado. Dalton and Katherine grew older gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. They became the patriarch and matriarch of a large, loving family, always ready with advice or support, always opening their home to anyone who needed it. On a warm summer evening in 1912, 30 years after that day in Rico, Dalton and Katherine sat on the porch of their home. They were both in their 60s now, their hair gray, their faces lined with age, but they still held hands, still found joy in each other's company. "Do you remember that day?" Katherine asked, not needing to specify which day. They both knew. "Every detail," Dalton replied. "The way you looked standing on that stage, so small and scared. The way your eyes met mine when I walked up. The way you cried and said no one wanted you." "It broke my heart, Katherine. I knew in that moment that I had to save you, but I did not know then that you would save me right back. You gave me everything, Dalton. A home, a family, a life worth living. You made me believe I was worth loving. You were always worth loving. I just made sure you knew it." He squeezed her hand gently. "Look at what we created, Katherine. 4 children, 12 grandchildren at last count, and more on the way. A ranch that employs half the county. A legacy of love and kindness. Not bad for a mountain man and an orphan girl who nobody wanted." Katherine smiled, that same warm smile that had captured Dalton's heart 30 years ago. Not bad at all. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains that had become their home. In the distance, they could hear the laughter of grandchildren playing, the sound of their family carrying on the evening air. Daniel walked by with his son, teaching the boy how to properly care for a horse's hooves. Emma was in the garden with her daughters, showing them which herbs to pick for cooking. The twins were working on building an addition to one of the houses, their hammers keeping a steady rhythm. Everything they had built, everything they had created, had started with a moment of compassion, with one man seeing worth in someone the world had overlooked. It had started with a young woman finding the courage to say yes to an uncertain future. It had grown into something beautiful beyond anything either of them could have imagined. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Dalton pulled Katherine close. I love you, Mrs. Lancaster. I have loved you from the moment I saw you, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond. I love you too, Mr. Lancaster. Thank you for walking up to that stage. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for giving me a life more beautiful than any dream. They kissed, a gentle kiss that held 3 decades of love, passion, partnership, and devotion. When they pulled apart, Katherine rested her head on Dalton's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, holding her close as they had done countless times before. The mountain air was cool and sweet, filled with the scent of pine and wildflowers. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, and thunder, now old and gray but still magnificent, answered with a whinny from the barn. The mountains stood eternal around them, witnesses to the love story that had unfolded in their shadow. Katherine thought back to that frightened girl on the stage, convinced she would never be wanted, never be loved, never amount to anything. She thought about how close she had come to giving up hope entirely. And she thought about the mountain man who had appeared like an answer to a prayer, strong and kind and willing to see past the surface to the person beneath. "What are you thinking?" Dalton asked softly. "I am thinking that I would do it all again. Every moment, every challenge, every hard winter and difficult day. I would do it all again to end up right here, right now with you." "Me too," Dalton agreed. 1,000 times over I would choose you. I would walk up to that stage and offer you freedom. I would bring you home to this mountain. I would build a life with you, every single time. As they sat together under the stars, surrounded by the evidence of their love in the form of family and home and legacy, Katherine and Dalton knew they had created something rare and precious. They had taken loneliness and rejection and transformed it into belonging and acceptance. They had taken pain and turned it into joy. They had taken 2 broken people and made them whole. The years continued to pass gently. Dalton and Katherine watched as their grandchildren grew and married and had children of their own. They celebrated births and weddings, mourned losses, and supported their family through all of life's joys and sorrows. They remained the heart of the family, the foundation upon which everything else was built. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered for a celebration. There were nearly 50 people present, all descended from or connected to Dalton and Katherine. As they stood together to cut their anniversary cake, their great-grandson, young Dalton's son, asked how they had met. Katherine smiled and looked at her husband. "Should we tell them?" "I think they are old enough to hear the story," Dalton replied. So they told it, the story of an orphan girl standing on an auction stage in Rico, unwanted and unloved, crying because no one would take her in. They told of the mountain man who walked up to that stage and saw worth where others saw nothing. They told of freedom given, love found, and a life built on respect, kindness, and devotion. As they spoke, Katherine watched the faces of their family, saw the children's eyes widen with interest, saw the adults exchange knowing glances. She saw Sarah squeeze Daniel's hand, saw Emma's husband pull her close. She saw understanding dawn on faces young and old about how precious and rare true love really was. "The point of this story," Dalton said, his voice still strong despite his years, "is that it only takes one person to change a life. One moment of compassion, one act of kindness, one decision to see someone as they truly are rather than what the world says they are. Katherine changed my life just as much as I changed hers. We saved each other, and that is what love does. It sees you, accepts you, and makes you better than you ever thought you could be." The family applauded, and several people wiped tears from their eyes. Young children might not have fully understood, but they would. Someday they would understand that the family they belonged to, the legacy they inherited, All started with a moment of courage and compassion on a dusty street in Rico, Colorado, in the summer of 1882. That night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Dalton and Katherine sat once more on their porch. It had become their tradition, their special time together at the end of each day, no matter how busy or tiring. "You think they understood?" Katherine asked. "I think they understood what matters. That love is a choice, a daily decision to see and value someone. That family is not just blood, it is who you choose to stand with. That kindness can change the world one person at a time." Katherine leaned her head on Dalton's shoulder, fitting perfectly against his side after 40 years of practice. "I am glad I get to grow old with you, Dalton Lancaster." "I am glad I get to grow old with you, Katherine Lancaster. You have made every day of the past 40 years worth living." They sat together until the moon rose high and the mountain air grew too cold to ignore. Then Dalton helped Katherine to her feet, and they walked inside together, hand in hand, still as in love as they had been on their wedding day. More years passed, gentle and full. Dalton and Katherine moved slower now, their bodies showing the wear of age and hard frontier living. But their minds remained sharp, and their love remained constant. They watched their great-grandchildren grow, saw the ranch continue to thrive under Daniel's leadership, and took comfort in knowing that everything they had built would continue long after they were gone. On a crisp autumn morning in 1920, Dalton woke to find Katherine had passed peacefully in her sleep. She looked calm, at rest, a small smile on her face, as though she had died dreaming of something beautiful. Dalton held her hand and cried, mourning the loss of the woman who had been his everything for 38 years. The family gathered for Katherine's funeral, and Dalton stood before them all, his voice breaking as he spoke. "She was everything good in my life. She taught me how to love, how to be a father, how to be a man worthy of respect. She took a lonely mountain and turned it into a home. She took a broken man and made him whole. I will miss her every moment of every day until I see her again." After the funeral, Dalton seemed to fade. Without Katherine by his side, the light went out of his eyes. He still smiled at his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, still offered advice when asked, but everyone could see that part of him had died with his wife. 6 months after Katherine's death, on a warm spring morning, Dalton passed away in his sleep. His family mourned, but they also understood. Dalton and Katherine had been two halves of one whole, and neither could exist long without the other. They buried Dalton next to Katherine on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath 2 tall pine trees. The marker was simple, just their names, dates, and a single line that Daniel had insisted upon. They saved each other. The family continued on. The ranch continued to thrive. And the legacy of Dalton and Katherine Lancaster lived on in every child, grandchild, and great-grandchild who carried their blood or their values. Stories were told and retold of the mountain man and the orphan girl, of the love that had transformed both their lives and created a family dynasty. Years turned into decades, and still the story persisted. It became family legend, passed down from generation to generation, about how love could bloom in the most unlikely places and change everything. About how one moment of compassion could ripple out into the world and touch hundreds of lives. About how being seen and valued was the greatest gift anyone could give. And high in the San Juan Mountains of Colorado, on land that had once been the isolated realm of a lonely mountain man, a thriving ranch community continued to flourish, a testament to what two people could build when they chose to see the best in each other, when they chose love over loneliness, when they chose to save each other and create something beautiful from the ashes of rejection and pain. The cabin where it all began still stood, preserved by the family as a memorial to their ancestors. Sometimes on quiet evenings, people swore they could hear laughter coming from inside, could see the shadow of a man and woman sitting together on the porch, holding hands and watching the sunset over the mountains they had called home. Whether it was memory or spirit, or simply the lingering echo of a great love, no one knew for certain. But what everyone agreed on was that Dalton and Katherine Lancaster had created something that could never die, a love so pure and powerful that it transcended time itself and lived on in the hearts of all who heard their story. And so the tale of the orphan girl who cried that no one wanted her, and the mountain man who proved her wrong, became more than just a family story. It became a reminder that everyone has value, everyone deserves to be seen, and that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the simplest act of kindness from a stranger who becomes the love of a lifetime.